Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thanks everyone for joining me today. I am excited for this next topic. We are going to be talking about how training builds strong cannabis operations and teams. A little bit about my background before we jump in here is that I got my start working in the cannabis industry in 2009, running and operating vertically integrated cannabis facilities. And in 2015, I founded my company, ICS Consulting, and I help cannabis operators get open and navigate the regulatory challenges across the United States. So let's give a warm welcome for my next guest, Maureen McNamara. Maureen is the founder and chief facilitator of Cannabis Trainers. Thank you, Maureen, for joining us today.
Delighted to be with you, Jenny.
Why don't you give our listeners a little bit about your background, when you got in the cannabis industry, and what you were doing before you got into the industry?
Sure, my pleasure. Training has been my game since the 1900s, so for decades and crossing millennium. I started working in the restaurant industry when I was in my 20s. I graduated with a philosophy degree with no idea what I was supposed to do in the world, but restaurant work called to me. They said, "Hey, you're pretty good at what you do. How about you train other people to do it that way?" And I did. That actually led into a career in training. Formerly, it was only the restaurant hotel industry. And within that, I started doing compliance training, food safety, how to sell alcohol safely and responsibly. And I'm based in Colorado. And when Colorado and Oregon were the first of our two states to pass that adult use legalization in 2013, I started thinking, knowing that January 1st of 2014 was going to be the first adult use legal sale of cannabis in the country. I
Yeah.
wonder if my decades of professional development, compliance training could be a contribution to the cannabis industry. And sure enough, it did, it is, it has been. I have been playing in compliance training for the cannabis industry since really late 2013, 2014.
I love it. I love it. And gosh, you probably have trained so many people across the country, I would imagine.
If I take all my decades, I've had a lot of birthdays, so it's plural decades now. It's a lot of people. I think just in the cannabis industry, we're getting close to 20,000 people trained since 2014. Yeah.
That's
So
incredible.
we've got to inspire a lot of people to know the rules and endeavor to never break them.
Yeah, and training's it's such a really important piece of the industry, and it will continue to be no matter how old the industry gets into the future. We're going to go ahead and dive in. And I think the first part really is just to start with the big picture and why training matters. And one of my thoughts is, why is training so critical in the cannabis industry, especially as it continues to grow and evolve, which it will for some time here?
As we know, at the time of this recording, we've still got a federally illegal substance that many states, I think we're up to 30 medical states and 15 or 16 adult use states, that we're doing something federally illegal. And to do that state compliantly is critical for a business to even stay open.
Yeah.
And training breaks my heart when operators think training or the budget for training is just low. But without proper training, truly, in this business, there's so much risk. Products that may not be safe or wholesome. And I always, in our classes, I love to ask agents that work in the dispensary industry to consider that everything they touch, make, create, process, or sell could end up in the hands of a patient. And patients might have a more fragile immune system. And if we're not being thoughtful in our processes and well trained, with the deep understanding, we don't want to put something out in the world that's not going to contribute to somebody's wellness, that in fact could contribute to unwellness. And
Yeah.
so training in any industry or business is important. I think in our world of cannabis training, with the legality, the implications, the potential for a product to be damaging to somebody is really
Yeah.
key.
And this is something that everyone, including patients who have compromised immune systems, are putting something in their body. So they have to be able to make smart choices and trust that they're being handled properly by the staff
Mhm.
and that whoever produced that product did it in a public safety manner. And like those things are just really important.
I remember, Jenny, in the early days, this is maybe 2014, I had a group of folks that assembled vape carts, and they would take the cart and put the mouthpiece on it and then package that with the mouthpiece attached. And truly, unironically, a person in the class raised their hand and said, "Hey, Maureen, should we be wearing gloves when we're handling the vape cart and attaching the mouthpiece?" And I paused and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is a legit question." They had not been trained that a mouthpiece going right into a patient's mouth would be something we wouldn't want to bare hand contact. And what I know for sure is that this participant, I often like to put people in two categories when I see people make mistakes or do things that don't make sense, is did they not know or
Yeah.
did they not care? And there was 0% of the I don't care. It was 100% like, no one mentioned this.
Yeah.
I didn't even know. I'm not sure if I know even where to find the gloves at my packaging facility. And it came from us solely, I didn't know.
Too, and if people who have that came over from another industry, not everyone has come from the restaurant industry where they were trained to wear gloves and trained to wash their hands and trained on health and sanitation practices. People could have come from other industries where that training and skill set has not even been developed yet.
Right.
And so I would think asking a question like that is fine because if they don't have the context, they would not know. It's true. Like I've seen people bare hand contact in the early days, just thinking, hey, this is just how we would do it when I was weighing it out at my house and
Yes.
making edibles for my friends. We never thought about wearing gloves. And I think just people aren't realizing we're commercial. We have public safety. We have people purchasing this. This is not selling brownies to your friends. And I don't know if you remember this, and I think it could have been Michigan or another state. I'm not 100% sure, but some facilities got flagged right when they were getting regulated and opening for the first time that they were licking joints. It's so crazy to say it, and you think,
It's
why
just
would
the way
that?
we've always done it. So why would we do it any
We've
differently?
always licked our joints. What do you mean? We've been
And
licking joints for 100 years and rolling
yes,
them.
totally. And I would say, again, in the spirit of if we're going to watch people do things that are shocking, did they not know or did they not care? That
Yeah.
wasn't, I don't care. This is just, wait, this is the only way I know how to do it. Yeah.
And I think too, because there's also cannabis culture that crosses over into this commercial industry. And we have the history and the culture and the community and all those things. And that's what people did. They rolled joints, they licked them, and they handed them to their neighbor. But when you get into commercial setting, it just has to be different because it's regulated. And I think obviously everyone is learning. I had not heard of that happening recently in years at all. So I think people are finally understanding what's going on. So my next piece is you specialize in adult education. What makes training adults, especially in compliance heavy industries, different from traditional education?
Yeah. When I think about the adult learner, I know that they want a deep understanding of the why. Why and how is this going to support me in my future? Why or how is this important back on the job? Or how does it allow me to more easily reach my goal? I think when we were all in school growing up, we took classes we didn't want to. We had to take the trig classes and the physics classes, even if you didn't feel drawn to that. There was, at least in the American education system, standard classes you have to take. As adults, ideally, we're working in jobs that we want to rather than hopefully within an industry, although many of us feel like we have to work. Hopefully, we're able to choose a little bit of something that lights us up. And so training adults is appealing to those motives of how does this really apply to me and impact me. And the other thing I think about training adults is that an adult's going to come with a whole experience, prior experiences, prior desires, and how we can make training appeal or fit into what they've done and what they're going to do can be really helpful as well.
I love that. That was really beautiful. I am a big believer in how and why am I doing this, but also knowing the hows and whys of that business for me to be engaged. So if I'm being trained, I need to know why I'm doing this, but I also think it's important to know why am I doing this in this business? What's the
Mhm.
purpose of me learning this? Is the purpose public safety and making sure I'm educating patients when they come in the correct way? And I think that why and how is on both sides versus for the employee and employer.
I love that you said that big picture because what that struck for me is that in the train, we lead compliance focused trainings. We inspire, our primary offering in the cannabis world is to inspire people to know the rules and play compliantly. And when you started working in 2009, you said you were in a vertical industry. So there's cultivators or growers, processors, manufacturers, and dispensaries or sellers. And oftentimes those groups don't often intermix. Like a cultivator is rarely at a dispensary unless there is a meet your farmer day. And when we teach classes and we've got cultivators and processors and dispensary agents all together, I love that most because they can learn from each other. And I think there's plenty of dispensary agents that's never been to a grow facility or to where the edibles are made.
Yeah.
And when we can have a bigger picture of how a trimmer trimming and the packager packaging impacts the dispensary agent selling and the patient opening it, when we can have a bigger holistic picture, that can, I think, help inspire some of that learning.
I agree. I just recently had a transporter on, and I thought it was fascinating that a lot of the cultivation facilities or dispensaries or manufacturers, if they've never done their own delivery, they think, oh, they're just picking up a product and driving it somewhere, but they don't realize the amount of effort and compliance and training and SOPs that actually goes in to delivering that product. There's this whole other thing going on behind the curtain. And I think that education is like really important for everybody to understand how does transportation work or how does this dispensary work? What are all the things they're going through on the farm and how they're growing it? And maybe they're hand watering it and all the trimming and all the work and compliance that goes in behind the scenes.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, good stuff. We're going to talk about making training memorable, which if I looked that up in a dictionary somewhere. I feel like your picture would be in there. For sure. And so compliance training has a reputation for being boring, which I have definitely heard this one a bunch of times. So how do you keep it engaging, relevant, and actually memorable for adult learners?
This is a big one. How many of us have taken a training, and if I were to ask you 3 questions from it, you might get stumped on it. There's something most trainers have heard of this, I'm not sure most non-trainers would have known. There's something called the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting, and I'm not gonna quote it directly, but while we're in a training, it's got it, "Yep, I got this," and right after the training, maybe we can successfully answer 40 questions about it. And then whether it's a day from now, a week from now, or a month from now, or 6 months from now, our recall goes down and down. And so to make it memorable, because I agree that if we were to say, "Hey, you wanna take a compliance training?" People are like, "Gotta book a root canal." That might be a little less painful. Is some of this training is actually a have to. Not because the business I love when businesses do this voluntarily, In some states, the training we've created is actually mandatory. So it's literally you have to, and an agent has to get it renewed at 1 year, or in some states, an agent must take the class again every 2 years. And so there's a lot of have to with that. I think we've all sat through training that was excruciatingly boring. And one of the ways we love to create an engaging training is actually through that word, engagement, is that interaction. Because adults come to the classroom with a whole buckets and buckets of wisdom already, we love to pull the wisdom of the folks that are in class with us. And as I'm saying this, I just want to share with our listeners that our courses are offered both facilitated, so think of that as old school classroom style, literally could practice with somebody, or via technology like Zoom, but it's synchronous. And then we do have on-demand training as well. So when we're thinking about facilitated training, engaging the learners through activities, questions, letting them share their stories from the street, share their wisdom, which is really another key way that adults learn, is we can talk about the rules. And when there's stories about how it went awry or how it went well, or a change we saw or a measurable change we saw, those stories, stats, and facts can really help the learner lock it in more. So one of the ways our program is different is the level of engagement through quizzes, worksheets, team breakouts, conversations with other colleagues to discuss topics. We like to say we're very lecture light. Lecture is not, for most learners, at all memorable.
I was just thinking, like, that is the best kind of learning when it is engaging. I'm on the edge of my seat and I'm fully paying attention, and it is the most memorable. I think there was a dispensary training I saw somebody doing back in Michigan where they went around the room asking all the bud tenders about a negative experience they had when they went to a restaurant and how it made them feel. And then they flipped it on its head saying, what if that person that was serving you was having a bad day? And they really just were about giving context of giving good customer service. And it was just a training exercise that they were doing. But I thought it was a really excellent training exercise.
Outside of elementary school or high school, even starts to transition in high school, as adult learners, we've got so much wisdom from our lives lived already. And analogies can be a great way to learn. So whether it's having received service and how does that translate into service excellence, which is actually a thread. Our compliance training is our primary, but we always weave service excellence and communication excellence through it.
What are some common mistakes businesses make when it comes to training, or worse, like skipping it altogether?
Yeah, I think common mistakes that business operators may have is that assumptions. I assume you already knew that. Folks, if a cannabis industry business is hiring somebody that they've recruited from a different cultivation, processing, or dispensary, they may assume they already know the rules or the
Yeah.
basics. And I think assumptions is one of the biggest mistakes that operators make, thinking folks already know this. I think if folks assume that people are already coming in with that wisdom, they may just skip it. Or another thing I've seen, and this is a cliche, I don't always like to use them, but here's one. If we don't have time to train right away, when would we find time to retrain? And so skipping the training can be really costly. And folks do that either because of budget reasons or assumptions
Yeah.
that this is just common sense. I have a brief story. Participant in one of my restaurant classes 20 years ago said, "Hey, it was my first job. I was working in a restaurant." And the GM said, "Hey, you got 20 minutes? I want you to go clean the walk in." And this 17-year-old's got it, boss, and went and cleaned the walk-in real well. Came back. The boss was like, I'll go check your work. The boss went to go check, came back and said, try again. That does not meet my standards in any way. In fact, I can't even tell you did anything there. And this went back and forth 3 times before the general manager said, let's go together. And the general manager walked toward the walk-in cooler, and the 17-year-old first-time job haver walked to the place where folks walk into the restaurant. And that just shares so many things about anyone that has worked in a business that had a cooler. A walk-in cooler, lingo is called a walk-in.
Yeah.
This kid had no idea what a walk-in was, so he assumed that's where people walk into the building.
Oh my
And you can see
gosh.
the communication breakdown, the assumptions, none of some of the classic training modalities of tell, show, do, review were in play there. It was just go do it with no coaching, instruction, or direction. And then folks might end up surprisingly disappointed.
That's a good story. Actually, that happens a lot. I think the lack of clarity and communication, or the lack of being clear and giving direction. I find
Yes.
that happens a lot.
And
And
the
it's,
lingo, Jenny, we have such
oh,
a
it,
lingo here. Like,
it happens with me all the time.
you
I'm
know,
like, what are they talking about?
yes. And my learning curve when I first started engaging in training in the cannabis industry, there was lingo. I was like, what is that? What is that? And I'm courageous enough to ask the questions and get the eye rolls and be like, you don't know what this means? I'm like, I'd love to know, because if I don't, I'm sure others don't either.
I'm the same way. I have no problem asking about acronyms. And I find too, when I'm working with other industries like the banking industry, they love acronyms. And I'm like, hey, what's that acronym you're using? I don't understand what it is. And maybe everybody knows in banking what it means, but I don't understand it. And I'm trying to help my listeners or my clients understand what that means, because they're not going to understand it either.
I was at a networking event, a dinner, and I was talking to another compliance person. I was like, oh, I love another compliance person. And she was asking me about, oh, what are your thoughts on Regulation 17-4?
In what state?
Also, I don't speak number regulations, but if you give me an overview, oh, the regulation about ID checking, I can engage in a conversation.
Yeah.
But she just said it 3 times and she's like, you don't know. I'm like, I might know that regulation. Can you give me context? And
Yeah.
it was another key part of adult learners is some of us love to learn socially. Some of us love to learn solo, which means just let me read it or let me do the class at my own time and own pace. Some of us prefer the visual. Some of us really only want to be hands-on, and blending all of those together. She was a very logical learner, where I'm preferring a social learning environment. Numbers locked in, where the story for me is more appealing. And as a great trainer, we want to blend those for our different learning styles.
Yeah. And sure, sometimes compliance people, even attorneys, will have this lingo. Here's the rule citation. And all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, I'm supposed to know this. But I don't even have every citation memorized out there. I am the same way.
Another thing to you is, like you said, in which state? Oh, you and I work across the country, and it takes a moment. I've got a lot of intel in here. Plus, I've had a lot of birthdays, so sometimes it takes a moment to access that intel. Is there to be a pause of, hold on, what do I know about this and in which state? And then within the states, this just keeps things interesting. Different counties, municipalities may have a few different variations as well.
It's
So it
true.
can be complex, and I think it's both of our jobs to allow our clients to approach it with more ease.
It is important to think about too when you're training, and whether you're working with a third party doing your training or you're doing some internal training, it's just to make sure you're clear. And if there's acronyms, that you're spelling out what they mean. And I think it's important to actually define terms. I like to go through the definitions in the rule set and just pick out ones that relate to that particular person's position. I do really think it's important.
I agree, that slang lingo element, and also because if it's a larger group and they have some experience, Crowdsourcing that intel can be a nice way for 3 of the people in the room actually know what that definition is, and crowdsourcing it allows them to feel heard rather than lectured to, while
Yeah.
asking that information gives everyone else that's embarrassed that they don't know what it is to hear it as well. So, yeah, I think some of
Yeah.
those basics we fly over and we should pause with.
Yeah, I think that normalizing it in a show of hands, I think it's important for people to say, "Oh, look, there's 5 other people who didn't know that. It's just not a me thing," right? And that it doesn't make me not intelligent. Look at all these other people who don't understand. So that crowdsourcing piece I think is important.
Mhm.
In your experience, what makes training actually stick with adult learners? What approaches or techniques have you found to be most effective? I know we talked a little bit about some of these.
For me, sticky training is being actively involved. The memorable pieces come when we are there. Now, a lot of listening is people pretending to. If we think about all the listening styles, there's the active listener, there's the pretending listener, there's the distracted listener, there's the vacation listener that is tuned in sometimes, but then chocolate, when can I have chocolate again? They drift off and think about other things. And so,
Mm.
one of the key things to sticky listening is constantly changing it up. Oh, I'm not going to quote this correctly, but I'm going to try. It's the gist that's important. 15 years ago, our attention span may have been 4.5 minutes. Currently, our attention span may be 42 seconds. Maybe.
Wow.
Disclaimer, not an official quote. There actually are statistics. That's the gist of how dramatically our attention span is tanking with so many distractions with us. So, another key part to sticky training is uh, shifting it up, keeping people engaged.
Yeah, that's true. That's amazing. Gosh, that's not a long time to hold someone's attention. For my next piece, when training saves the day, can you share a moment where strong training directly prevented compliance issues or saved a company from a serious mistake?
This is an interesting one about how training has saved a company. And I know there's examples. I'll share a mini one. I also am thinking that good training means there's less issues, and less issues aren't noticeable. We notice when there's a crisis, and then we can rear view mirror, where did we go awry? What do we need to now implement? And what's hard to qualify is, have we been, you know how when we drive past construction sites, it says accident free 253 days?
Yeah.
I see those and I'm like, training is working in there. It's noticeable when there's an issue, we see the training gap. But when business is running well and there are no violations, no citations, loyalty is there, sales are steadily maintaining or increasing, we would also then look at, gosh, the training's going really well here.
Mhm.
So, where was there a prevention of a ball drop? We actually wouldn't know because the training was so good that things are working as they should. So, I'll share 2 examples. I had a dispensary agent in class. We discussed fraudulent IDs, fake IDs, borrowed IDs, in depth, a lot of crowdsourced feedback, IDs they had seen, good stories from the streets about people they knew that had fake IDs. And one of the points of checking an ID thoroughly is noticing the signature. Oftentimes, straight up fraudulent IDs have a computerized font signature rather than a human signature. Because this group was taking the training every year, The next year, the same person was in my class again and said, Maureen, you're not going to believe it. 4 days after the last time I was in your classroom, I came across an ID and the signature was so obviously fraudulent. I
Whoa.
confiscated it right away. I couldn't wait to come back and tell you. I knew because of the signature, you had described it, you showed us an image, and I saw it a few days after class. And so that was getting feedback on that. Although it was great that I got to see him again so he could tell me that story. I think one other example that comes to mind about this is there was a production machine, and some of those machines can be dangerous if not well trained. And there was
Yeah.
a lockout tagout procedure that wasn't followed right away. And the cleaning of a machine, a manager came by, noticed what was happening, and was able to jump in and just call everything to a halt, check everything. They needed to do a lockout tagout procedure. So it wasn't being followed, but it was caught before it became an injury.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Jenny, it's interesting how to tell when training's working oftentimes may be subtle because there's no issues.
Yeah.
And we don't
That's
notice no
yeah,
issues. We
it's
notice the
true.
issues. Yeah. So,
When I go into facilities and I do audits, I like to say, here are the gaps, but I also like to say, hey, by the way, here are all the things going well. And I think that's important to do both. Here's where we need to improve and grow. Here's where you guys are crushing it. And so I think that's training too. Oh, we have some things to work on. We're seeing some things come up or issues, or employees are forgetting this one thing. We need to double down and do more training, but also letting them know, hey, everyone's doing great. Let's celebrate those wins.
yeah, that classic SWOT analysis is so key for this. And I love when you're doing all your audits, which are such an important, impactful way for people to know their strengths are and what their opportunities are, is the strengths get to be really lauded, applauded, where the opportunities are, let's see what systems need to be changed or upgraded and what training needs to be instilled or enhanced
Yeah.
so that folks feel empowered to do their jobs well.
We're going to dive into training beyond compliance, and how can training support not just compliance, but company culture, consumer safety, and even brand trust in cannabis.
Yeah. I had a client that was vertically integrated and said, I don't really consider myself in the cannabis industry. I consider myself in the compliance industry. And if we
Mm,
do the compliance, then we get to cultivate, process, and sell. And so it is, in some people's opinion, a foundational training. And if we're doing things compliantly, but people are strongly dissatisfied, we're going to have a real hard time staying in business.
yeah.
And company culture is definitely can be based in training, understanding core values. A lot of that is training our supervisors to manage well. I don't know about you, Jenny, but I think I might have said this in the beginning. I was pretty good at what I did. So they said, now you should train. People that are pretty good at their job often get promoted from within, which is fabulous for growth opportunity within a
Yeah.
business. Doing a job and supervising, managing, and coaching are different skills. And so when I think about training to impact service excellence and culture, and ultimately brand or brand awareness for a guest or for a consumer or patient, a training, culture of training is really key for that. And a lot of that can be in communication skills, management skills, service excellence skills. All of those help create loyalty, which create longevity and stability. And that's really, in this woman's opinion, where a brand can flourish when our have a sense of real ownership and pride in what they've created and crafted and now are offering to the world, that that is such a key piece to a positive experience. Now, if we go back to the don't know or don't care, the don't care people are really detrimental and they really need to just move right on out, though
Yeah,
it can really take down a business.
it's
But
true.
the I do care and I am committed, when we can train and supervise and inspire those folks, that becomes such amazing brand commitment, brand awareness, brand loyalty as well.
I think investment is so important. Investing in your business and investing in your employees, and then those employees feeling invested in can really help drive that culture. And I think a lot of times
Yes.
employees lack that feeling of feeling invested in.
Yes, and I could misquote some stuff again if I felt like that would be fun. There is some fact stat out there that when somebody is dissatisfied in their job, it's often not the hourly rate or the salary. It's that cultural feeling, belonging to, feeling respected, important, feeling and knowing that there's a growth path ahead for them. Those things can mean a lot to the employee.
Hmm. I agree. My next question is, what are some best practices that you have found for getting buy-in from leadership when it comes to investing? Speaking of investing, when it comes to investing in quality training programs.
Yeah, when we think about the investment in training and having leadership buy into that, I think we want to know what compels that person. What are they most committed to? Are they committed to company culture? Are they committed to the longevity of their business? Are they committed to sales? And once we know that, then we want to craft a story about how training will help them reach their goals with more ease. I was actually on a call with a longtime client this morning, and I was so generous to say that they really love the style and the modality of our training. And they have taken other classes and they have absolutely come back because of quality. And for many businesses, you have choices. We can go with the bare minimum to check the box. We can do training that hopefully isn't a total snooze or boring. And we can do training that is really engaging and interactive and thoughtful and designed for the adult in mind. And there can be a different price tier for that.
Yeah,
And it really depends on what that company values. Some companies might say, we just want to check the box. We like to just do what's required because our values are elsewhere. That's good information for them to know. And so I think when a company is assessing what type of training to do, they want to look at their values, their core tenets, and what's going to be a fit for that. I think if a company is struggling to even find any of their budget for investing in training, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of longevity for that business. Actually, might be somebody's business plan is just to get up, go get some sales, and maybe exit. And so
it's
they
true.
may have a different vision.
Sometimes people's core value is just making the money and getting out. That's it.
Yeah,
That's my roadmap. And every place is different and everybody has their own ideas. But for those who want to have training and want to have these investments, it is something to think about. Like, how can I tie compliance and training and investing in my business and my staff into my core values of my business?
exactly. Exactly. And then it shouldn't be an afterthought. I used to travel the country back in the 90s of doing new restaurant openings. And there's so much that goes into opening a new business or opening a new dispensary. The investment is massive. And to risk that without having detailed training doesn't make any sense. I think an investor would say, tell me about your learning and development program. Because if I'm going to put millions into this business, I want to know that it's going to operate smoothly, successfully without citation violation for decades.
Yep, it's true. People's processes and product. That's it, the three P's. And the people, meaning your employees, and how you are investing in your people and your processes and your products.
I know that this is true, I believe, for you and I. Our philosophy is investing in the people creates the loyalty, reduces turnover, is a way to save. Turnover is a crazy expense for businesses. And that investment in people culture, it feels like it's spending money, but I'm using that I word intentionally. It's investing. The cost of turnover is so pricey that people are going to spend the money in a different way rather than investing in their education and development.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Training across borders and regulations is going to be challenging, especially for operators, multi state operators, and how they're approaching this. With so many states having different rules, how can companies stay compliant while they're scaling across these borders?
We've worked with many an operator that have multiple states and they have compliance teams, they have training teams, and it's tricky to have consistency. I think if we used Starbucks as an example, if I get my favorite white chocolate mocha in any state, ideally, and in my quality checking so far, has tasted the same, right? That white chocolate mocha I know is going to be the same everywhere. If we take that to the cannabis industry, there's different rules. If we were to sell a 10 milligram gummy in Massachusetts, that would be illegal because it's 5 milligram serving. And so MSOs have an extra little heavy lift than our classic mom and pop that might have 1 or 3 locations within the same state. I like to think about that as knowing the rules and then playing slightly above them. I would say one of the keys for our MSOs is agility and in depth wisdom. Labels aren't consistent. Labels are probably one of the things that is easily pointed to as varied in many of our states, what's required, what's not. What some of my clients will do will take a look at where's the most restrictive label and then try to make those a more standard element across brand for brand consistency. But there will be always variations and variables that need to be taken into account to be compliant in each state. So yeah, it really is a team of people to make sure that is happening. And then as you and I know, it's not just state awareness, it's variations within each state can take place as well.
For example, if I had a chain of restaurants across the United States, state-wise, they may all be the same and the same SOPs and same systems, but then you have every health department in each state, and those health departments could be very different with their rules and regulations around licensing and when you're getting food safety training. And so then you have more of the local rules and regulations when it comes to opening of a restaurant and how often your inspections are that could differ state by state as an example of outside the cannabis industry.
Yeah, I think for many of our MSOs, there's some baseline consistencies. If I'm going to make up statistics again, let's just say between markets, like 60 to 70% of the rules are very similar. Maybe that's even higher. And
Yeah.
then there's like 20% where, oh, these are quite different. Documentation, SOPs, systems to help notice and tickle those reminders that need to happen are what's essential, those systems to differentiate.
And wrapping up, I want to talk about building a training foundation. I think this will be really helpful for listeners. And what advice would you give a new cannabis business trying to build a strong training foundation from day one.
Yeah. So if somebody's just joining the cannabis industry or relaunching, how to have training be a main part of that is the training doesn't start when you hire your folks. The training program is something that's built into the operating plan, into your whole business development planning process, is to consider. I like to start any type of training with considering the end in mind. What are our values? What's our vision? Where are we going? What's true 5 years from now? Then we back in, what do we need to do 2 years from now? What do we need to do 1 year from? And to create that, if we think about the launch as our center point to happen 1 month prior, 2 months prior, a year prior, I think a smaller operator may need to consider, do I want an internal training team? Do I want external trainers that can customize for our group? There's a lot of different design paths to go for that. But training gets to be one of those key considerations from the very beginning. Learning and development, the training, the methodology, what philosophy do your leadership need around training? All of that gets to be considered right up front when we're building that business plan.
Even like a hybrid version too, where you are doing some internal training and then you're also working with that third party.
Absolutely. Yes. In the world of cannabis only, some
Mhm.
states actually require that it's a third party
Mhm.
so that there's no conflict of interest. Of course, there's on the job training. There's updates that need to and can be quickly and easily handled on premises, and that's really key. I
Yeah.
think any company that's not looking into how AI can help contribute to their training is something to really explore, to look at, to be aware of. Even as a chief facilitator, having a training company for decades, multiple training companies, it's something, of course, we're looking at and how can that be? And then, Jenny, like you mentioned, it can be brief 3 minutes on the job training is the smallest, is those team updates, those pre shift meetings really are informative training opportunities.
Yeah.
Then there's the more professional training or designed training.
I think that gives a better background of just the different possibilities that are out there for training. And once you have that foundation, for me personally, I think you just keep building and building on it as you grow, as you expand, as your company gets bigger. Maybe you want to start going into other states and you're just going to keep strengthening that foundation.
It's so much easier to scale, as you just mentioned, going into other states. It is so much easier to scale when the foundation systems are already in place to help that
True.
growth occur.
It's true. I've seen people try to scale without the foundation or not getting it set up or tightened up and all the kinks worked out and they just want to hurry up and scale and
Yep.
buy as many licenses as they can, and it's like just throwing your whole business inside of a washing machine on the agitation cycle and you're like, what the heck's happening, not happening. I've just seen kind of disaster come from that situation.
Yeah, agreed.
So what's one myth or misconception about cannabis compliance training?
Oh, a myth about cannabis compliance and training is it's going to be a total teeth grinding snooze. People come in with very low expectations. They come in all hostage style, like, I'm here because I have to be, which in some states, as we mentioned, is true. Or we've got the folks that are coming in of, I've already done this 4 times. Am I really needing to take this again? So I think the myth can be that it's going to be dry cracker and it's going to be very painful because it's really talking about regulations, and not everybody gets excited around reading 283 pages of regulations. Our job to read the regulations, make them approachable, learnable, memorable, understandable, and then create that an engaging part. So I think the misperception is it's going to be more painful than a root canal, where it actually, we might turn it around and have it be interesting for folks.
Yeah, we're gonna actually make you love root canals.
Yeah. We
It's
love
gonna be
talking
like
about regulations, compliance checks, rules.
I love it. I love it. Is there a difference in training for different roles in cannabis, like bud tenders versus managers versus compliance officers?
When we think about training, there's a baseline that everybody needs to know, right? Whether that's core values, mission, our philosophy, the goals that we have, keeping folks involved and heading toward those. That's training that could go across the board. Communication skills. As far as compliance goes, there's probably, in a make up statistic again way, 75 to 80% of it's relevant for everybody. But then job specific training is essential. A dispensary agent is not a extraction artist, and they're not dealing with the same equipment, volatile substances, chemicals that others are. So safety training is different in a dispensary than it is in a cultivation facility. What to do in case of a fire is going to be the same in types of fire, would be the same across the board. How to handle chemicals will vary depending on what's on the property. So customization is really essential. And a lot of that, Jenny, like you mentioned before, is that internal training because the every building can be a little bit different. Chemicals or substances may be at property. So job specific training is really important.
Yeah, equipment from the POS where you're punching in numbers on the iPad versus running extraction equipment or the automation equipment in a cultivation facility, like the irrigation system, the fertigation, and what if it's all computerized in the cultivation facility and controlling the environment and being able to use those computers would completely be different than working in a dispensary.
100 ways. I have not yet done the hands-on extraction of cannabis. I've had many opportunities to go watch it happen, and it's just a whoa. I know I would need significant training, a partner with me for days to feel confident to get involved in that. And the folks that have been working in extraction, it feels like second nature for them. So, yeah, there's that job specific training is essential, role really tailored to that company, that person, that machine.
Yeah, it's true. And I think too, the employee's passion or love for what they're doing. And I've met a lot of extractors who just really love doing the extraction and being that extraction person, making the different concentrates. And I've met bud tenders who just love their job. They're like not interested. And
In
even
cross training, yeah.
yeah, they're not interested in becoming a manager. They're not interested in going into cultivation. They actually like the face to face with the customers and they like talking about product and they like learning about all the new emerging products happening in their market or in the industry. And so everyone is out there trying to discover what's my niche? Where do I fit in? Where do I belong? Who's my tribe within the tribe, the cannabis tribe, and where do I fit? And these little compartments in the industry and where can I thrive the most?
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that struck me that I wanted to clarify, let's just say somebody's been an extraction pro for 5 years. They get recruited to work at a different company, or that company gets bought and now they're working at different location. Even though I'm a D4 expert, like development level 4, which means I'm advanced, I don't need coaching training. I just need to know I've got my supplies. I can just go for it. I'm a self-reliant achiever. When I go to a new facility, if the machine, the switchers are different or the ventilation system, it really is, I need more training as well.
It's true.
So one of the things that we can mistakenly do is when we have a bunch of self-reliant achievers, that's development level 4, they really learn it, they know their craft well, they don't need a lot of coaching, corrective coaching or praise coaching, we assume they're good to go. But if one thing happened and their confidence got shaken, our development levels can be like, oh, now wait, that batch didn't come out quite right, or the alarm went off. I'm flustered. We can toggle through our learning steps even when we're expert level. So again, it's be thoughtful about not assuming
Yeah.
if a new machine comes in or a different layout or a new building, if that expert now becomes the area supervisor and goes to 3 different facilities, each facility might be a little bit different and each machine might be different.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's actually really important that people think about that. And it's really easy, even myself thinking, oh, I've been doing this forever. I can launch a dispensary with my eyes closed. But if I get into a new state, I have to make sure I'm properly trained and informed. I can't just go in saying, oh, it's just going to be like launching a dispensary in Colorado or in New Jersey. I have to prepare and educate myself and do homework and to make sure that I'm adapting to that new state or laws and whatnot, just like equipment. So you don't want to, even though people might be at that level 4 that you were talking about
Yeah.
in their skill set, I feel like there's always an opportunity to learn. And even though I've been doing this 16 years, I never feel like I'm there. I feel like I always have more to work towards and always have more to learn, no matter how much I've learned in the last 16 years. There's always an opportunity for me to grow and be better.
And that's the kind of core values and mindset that I think a lot of successful companies have is knowing that's true. And if we don't know what's going to light up our crew, our leadership, the folks working with us, ask them, what do you want to
Yeah.
learn? What's your next stretch? How can I make working here even more delightful for you, more powerful
Yeah.
for you? And what do you want to learn next? Because there's that when people are in jobs that they love, there's that desire. And that is so key. And to nourish and nurture that is what helps us move forward strongly.
Thank you so much for being here today. Gosh, you're a true gem in this industry. And if no
Jenny,
one's ever met you, they have no idea. You
it's
are
been
missing out.
such a joy to cross paths with you for all the time because you've been in the industry way longer than me. And so it's always sweet to cross paths with you. Thank you for including me.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for being here today. And I just want to let our listeners know that you can find this podcast streaming on Apple, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, as well as it will be posted on my YouTube channel under the microscope with Jenny. And I will have Maureen's links and all her information in the comment section and find out where she's at. It's worth the investment working with Maureen. She is incredible at what she does. So,
Thanks, Jenny. That's really sweet.
yeah.
Cheers to each of us moving the industry forward with like ease and integrity and professionalism.
I agree. I agree. All right. Cheers, everyone. Thank you.